Hi, friends. Tonight, as the world grows quiet and your breathing softens, let us travel together, slowly, gently, into the forgotten valleys of ancient Greece. There, where dry winds sweep across olive groves and sun-baked hills echo with tales, carved in marble lies a city unlike any other. A place where softness was stripped away and only the hard remained. We are going to Sparta. Not the Sparta of silver screens, with its grand battles and crimson cloaks, but the true Sparta, ancient and unvarnished. A city of stone and silence. And as we journey there, I shall tell you not of heroes, but of pain, of what would await you if, by some enchantment, you awoke one morning as a boy among them, a mere child of 7 years, barefoot and trembling in a world without comfort. For you, dear friend, would not survive even a day. You open your eyes, and already something is wrong. The floor beneath you is not warm, it is not soft. It is made of rough stone scattered with straw. There is no mother's whisper to greet you, no scent of warm bread. Only the whistle of the morning wind, sharp as a blade, slipping through narrow cracks in the wall. This is your new home, the barracks of the Agoge, the state training system that owns you now. You were taken last night. There was no ceremony, no farewell. Spartan boys are removed from their families at the age of 7 to be remade. The city of Sparta does not raise children. It hammers them into soldiers. Around you, the others are already rising. No one speaks. No one groans or stretches or rubs the sleep from their eyes. They move with a practiced urgency, silent, swift, obedient. You are slower. You hesitate. That alone marks you as weak. A grizzled instructor watches from the shadows. His arms are crossed, his eyes sharp as flint. He does not shout, he does not encourage. In Sparta, the absence of punishment is the only reward. Your feet touch the ground. Cold shoots up your legs. You are barefoot, as always. You will walk and run and train on rough stone, thorny hills, and sun-baked fields, with nothing to shield. You pull your single cloak tighter around your shoulders, though it barely staves off the chill. There are no tunics, no sandals, no extra coverings. Hardship is your new tutor. You are hungry. You will remain so. There is no breakfast here, no soft porridge or dried fruit to break the fast. In the Agoge, hunger is a tool. It teaches cunning. If you wish to eat more, you must steal. But if you are caught, not for stealing, but for failing, you will be beaten. And so begins the march. Down through the stony paths, across the rising slopes of the hills, the boys run in silence. Their breath fogs the air, their limbs lean and wiry, their faces unreadable. You struggle to keep pace. Your chest burns, your heart thunders. Already you are falling behind. One boy stumbles. The instructor steps forward, not to help, but to strike. A swift, measured blow to the back of the legs. The boy rises, says, "Nothing." Limping, he continues. You do not cry. You dare not. By mid-morning, the boys are herded into the training yard. Today's lesson: wrestling. The earth here is dry and cracked, the sun already harsh upon your skin. You are paired with another boy, taller, leaner, his eyes hollow. He does not hesitate. With brutal speed, he grabs your tunic, lifts you from your feet, and slams you into the dirt. You taste blood. Sand grits between your teeth. You do not surrender. That is worse than losing. Again, you charge. Again, you fall. No words of praise, no correction. The instructors merely watch. Every stumble, every mistake is etched silently into their memory. Those who fail too often are noted, and when the time comes, they disappear from the training yard, never to return. The day grinds on. Sword drills with wooden weapons follow the wrestling. You are made to hold the blade for hours until your arms shake. Then, running. Endless laps around the yard, your body soaked in sweat, your legs screaming for rest. Still, no food, no water. Spartan boys are taught to endure, not to need. Evening brings a brief reprieve. A single hunk of black barley bread, dense, dry, barely enough to dull the ache in your belly. You are allowed no more. If you wish to feast, you must take it, quietly. Some boys sneak into the kitchens, a wedge of cheese, a sliver of dried meat. But if they are caught, oh, the punishment. You've heard stories. One boy whipped so fiercely, his back scarred in stripes. But he did not cry. He was praised, not for stealing, but for enduring. The stars now stretch over Sparta, glimmering cold and distant. You lie once more upon the stones, your cloak wrapped tight. Around you, the others whisper of challenges yet to come, of the tests deeper in the mountains, of nights spent alone, hunting in silence. You shiver, not from the cold, but from the knowledge that you are not ready. Not truly. You thought Sparta was about strength, about battles and glory. But Sparta begins with breaking, with stripping away every comfort, every softness, every smile you once knew. And only then, may something new be forged. But you would not survive the cold stones of Sparta, not even one day. Night in Sparta was never truly dark, not with the stars above, piercing, pale, eternal, and the whispers that slithered through the shadows like coiled serpents. In the barracks of the Agora, sleep came not with lullabies, but with vigilance, eyes half-lidded, ears alert, hearts still beating to the rhythm of fear. And that night, you saw him. They called him Lycon, not his birth name, not the name given to him by his mother, long since forgotten. No, the other boys had named him so because of the scars. 3 long lines across his back, curved like the claws of a wolf. No one knew how he had earned them. Some said he fought a beast in the wild during one of the secret trials. Others whispered that he had been lashed for defying an instructor and that he had not cried. Not even once. He was older, perhaps 10 or 11. Time had hardened him, his limbs lean and roped with muscle, his stare fixed and empty. He spoke little, but his presence alone was command enough. When he moved through the camp, boys stepped aside. When he trained, others watched in silence. That night, you woke before the others. A rustle, a shadow at the doorway. You saw him. Lycon, slipping away into the woods beyond the barracks. Barefoot, silent, a ghost among trees. You hesitated. You were not meant to leave the camp, not without permission, but something in you, curiosity perhaps, or the simple aching need to understand, drew you from your stone bed. You followed, your steps clumsy, your heart thudding louder than your feet. The forest was vast, ancient. The air smelled of pine and ash. Branches scraped your arms. Somewhere, an owl called. And still, you followed. Lycon moved like no child should, like an animal. He slipped through the undergrowth with a precision that betrayed years of harsh learning. At last, he stopped at a clearing, a small fire already burning low, embers dancing in silence. Beside the flame sat a figure. An old man, clad in a rough woolen cloak, his face lost in the shadows of a hood. His hands, weathered and scarred, held a wooden bowl. He passed it to Lycon without a word. Lycon knelt, no questions, no resistance. He drank. Then the old man spoke, his voice like gravel stirred by wind. "Tell me what you've learned," Lycon replied, his voice even. "Pain is weakness leaving the body. Silence is strength. I am not a boy, I am a wolf." The old man nodded. "Show me." Without hesitation, Lycon rose, removed his cloak, and pressed his hands to the glowing coals beside the fire. His palms sizzled. The smell of burning flesh filled the clearing. But he did not cry. You wanted to scream, to rush forward, to stop it, but you did not, because in Sparta, this was not cruelty. this was the way. The next morning, the barracks awoke to the sound of shouting. 2 boys had stolen olives from a merchant's cart. They were dragged into the center of the yard, forced to kneel, their faces pale but proud. Lycon stood beside the instructor. He would deliver the punishment, and you watched, breath held, as he did so. Not with glee, not with anger, but with purpose. A lash for each failure. A lesson, not a vengeance. That night, the 2 boys whispered of pride, of how they had not cried. Lycon said nothing, but you, trembling under your cloak, could not forget what you had seen in the woods, the fire, the scars, the way his hands had blistered, yet never trembled. Later that week, during a solo foraging trial in the hills, you were paired by chance, or perhaps fate, with him. It was meant to be a test of endurance. Each boy given a knife, a cloak, and 2 days to survive alone in the hills. You had prepared, or so you thought. But the first night, you were already cold beyond reason. Hunger gnawed at your belly. You wept silently, though you prayed no one could hear. And then, Lycon appeared beside your fire. He did not offer comfort, only a single word. Move. You followed. He led you to a hidden grove, where a small spring gurgled beneath moss-covered rocks. Beside it, a snare he had set earlier, holding a rabbit still twitching. With quick, brutal efficiency, he broke its neck, skinned it, and roasted it over a quiet flame. When he handed you half, you hesitated. But he nodded. This is not mercy, he said. It is training. You ate. That night, as the fire crackled low, you dared to ask, why do you do this? He did not answer at first. Then, softly, because if I don't, I disappear, like the others. You did not need to ask which others. You knew. The boys, who failed, who cried too loudly, who hesitated in drills, who never returned from the forest. They make wolves here, he murmured, staring into the flame, and wolves must be cruel to survive. You slept that night not in fear, but in understanding, and when the trial ended, the instructors found both of you waiting, uninjured, alert. Lycon received no praise, only silence, but that, in Sparta, was enough. You thought yourself brave once, that you could endure what they endured, but courage, you now saw, was not a feeling. It was a habit, beaten into the soul, again and again, until nothing soft remained. And even still, you knew, you could never be like Lycon. You could never bear the wolf scars, not truly. The mountains of Sparta were more than mere stones and wind. They were ancient sentinels, vast, quiet, watching. And beneath their ridges, hidden from the sun and the sound of life, lay secrets that even many Spartans never dared to name aloud. You learned of it by accident, or perhaps, as Lycon once hinted, there were no accidents in the agoge, only designs too old to trace. It began with a name, Therion, whispered, never spoken in daylight. It meant beast in the old tongue, but the boys said it with reverence and fear. When one failed too many times, when one cried out too loudly, when one begged for mercy, he would be sent to Therion, not as punishment, as purification. You asked what that meant. The younger boys only shook their heads. The older ones looked away. But one evening, while gathering firewood in the groves near the mountain's edge, you found a path. It wound upward in a serpentine line, half hidden by brambles, as though Sparta herself wished it forgotten. Still, you climbed. The sun had dipped low, casting the stones in amber light. Your fingers brushed ancient carvings as you ascended. Lions, serpents, faces hollow-eyed and ageless. At last, you came upon the shrine. It was older than anything you'd ever seen. A ring of broken columns around a sunken altar, the ground stained with soot and rust. Votive offerings, Bones of small animals, broken knives, bits of red cloth littered the area. At its center stood a stone statue of a warrior, faceless, with one hand raised not in greeting, but in silence. You stepped closer, and that was, when you heard it, a breath, not yours. From the shadows of the shrine, a figure emerged. It was Lycan. He did not look surprised. "You shouldn't be here," he said, voice low. "I followed the path," you murmured. "No one follows it," he replied. "They are sent." Then he studied you for a long moment, and something behind his eyes shifted. Not kindness, not trust, but recognition. "Perhaps," he said slowly, "it's time." He led you down, not back to the barracks, but deeper. Beneath the shrine, through a narrow crevice in the rock, barely wide enough to squeeze through. Your hands scraped against the walls. The air grew colder, the light thinner, and then a chamber, circular, carved from the mountain's heart. Torches flickered along the edges, their flames casting grotesque shadows on the walls. Symbols, some familiar, some foreign, were etched into every surface. There were no guards, no priests, only the mountain. "This is Cryptia," Lycon said. You knew the word. All Spartan boys did. It was the secret rite, the Shadow War. Once, a boy proved himself worthy, he would be chosen, taken from the Agog and trained in silence, solitude and shadow. The chosen would learn not only to fight, but to kill unseen. To live in wilderness for months, to become fear itself. But this place, this felt older than Cryptia, older even than Sparta. "What is this?" you whispered. "It's where we become more than boys," he said, "or where we are broken." From a niche in the wall, he retrieved 2 daggers. One he gave to you, the other he held against his palm. "You will spend the night here," he said, "alone." Your mouth went dry. There are no instructors, no tests, no scores. He pressed the hilt into your hand, only what you carry in you. Then he turned and vanished into the stone corridor, leaving you in the flickering dark. The hours that followed were not filled with monsters, but with silence, and silence, you learned, is its own kind of beast. You sat against the cold wall, your cloak drawn tight, the dagger trembling in your grip. Your mind raced, visions of Lycon burning his hands, of the faceless statue above, of boys sent here and never returning. The air grew thick. You swore the walls moved. At one point, a voice called your name from the shadows. Soft, familiar. Your mother's voice. You stood, but no one was there. Later, a soft footstep, a whisper, a laugh. You covered your ears, but the sounds came from inside your own skull. And that was when you understood. The shrine, the chamber, the dagger. They were not here to test your strength. They were here to test your mind. At dawn, Lycon returned. You were still seated. The dagger lay beside you, untouched. He looked down at you. Then he nodded. "You heard them," he said. You nodded. "They come to everyone." He helped you stand. "They say if you answer them," he whispered. "You never leave." You climbed in silence. When you emerged from the shrine, the sun had risen high over the mountains. Birds called from distant branches. The world felt brighter, but distant, like a memory you could no longer hold. And when the other boys saw you return, their eyes widened. They said nothing, but one whispered to another, "He went to Therion and came back." You said nothing, because some truths in Sparta were never spoken, only endured. That night, you lay upon the stone, still shivering, not from cold, but from the memory of the chamber, the flickering light, the voice that sounded like your mother, and you knew, with the weight of certainty, you would not survive another night beneath the mountain. Not again, not ever. Morning in Sparta brings no comfort. It does not stretch forth with soft sunbeams or warm bread. nor does it greet you with the gentle rustle of leaves or the scent of honey. It is cold. It is swift. It arrives like an officer's command, sharp, echoing, leaving no room for dreams to linger. You wake upon the stone, your body stiff, your cloak damp with the dew of the Spartan barracks. Around you, the others rise, silent as ever. Not from respect for sleep, but because words, in Sparta, are rationed more strictly than food. And food today is even more scarce than usual. Hunger in the agoge is a constant presence, like a shadow that never steps away from your side. It is not accidental. It is orchestrated, designed, a deliberate tool of the state. Spartan boys are kept on the edge of starvation, not to punish, but to provoke cunning, to provoke theft, to provoke survival. And today, you feel it more keenly than ever. The pangs are no longer dull. They are sharp, clawing, twisting your gut as you march through the training yard. Every movement is a reminder of emptiness. Your limbs feel like wood. Your vision blurs at the edges. There is a lesson in this too. Spartan must learn to fight not just with strength, but with nothing. To swing a sword not when well fed and rested, but when starving, wounded, and half dead. But today, the emptiness inside you has begun to whisper. At midday, a new task is given. You are sent to clean the storage huts on the outskirts of the training compound. A test, though no one says it aloud. The instructors never tell you what is being measured. They simply watch. The huts are cool and dim inside, their air thick with dust and dried herbs. You sweep, scrub, stack. Your arms ache with each motion. You try to keep your mind on the task, but your eyes drift again and again to the corner. There, atop a shelf, lies it, a block of salted pork, a rind of barley bread, and beside it, a bowl, tiny but unmistakable, of honey. You freeze. No one else is with you. The door stands open, the sun a thin line on the floor. Your mouth waters so violently it hurts. You hear your own heartbeat. Stealing is permitted, but being caught is death. You reach out, and just then, a whisper behind you. Will you share it? Lycon. You hadn't heard him enter. He stands in the doorway, arms folded, face unreadable. You snatch your hand back. I wasn't... He raises a hand. Don't lie. Silence. The salted pork sits still. Heavy. Sacred. He steps closer. You won't survive without it. But if you take it wrong, you won't survive that either. What do I do? Lycon looks at the food, then at you. Split it in half. Offer some to the shadows. You blink. The shadows. He gestures to the doorway. The world is always watching in Sparta. The instructors, the gods, the spirits. Of the mountain, feed them first. It sounds mad, but you obey. You take the smallest bite of bread, place it on the threshold. The honey, a single drop. Then you step back. Lycon does the same. You eat the rest, not greedily, but reverently. Each grain of salt, each chew of the meat feels like salvation, like memory, like life returning to your bones. That night, no one mentions the food. No punishment comes. No gaze lingers too long. But when you lie down, belly no longer gnawing, something feels different. Not comfort, not safety, but a strange awareness. You dream of a great shadow, seated on a stone throne, watching you, silent, but not unkind. The next day, 2 boys are missing from training. No explanation is given. Later you hear whispers. One had been caught sneaking into the storeroom. The other tried to lie about it. Their absence becomes a lesson. In Sparta you may steal, but only with grace, only with boldness, only without shame. In the days that follow, hunger becomes less of a torment, not because the food increases, but because you begin to understand its rhythm, when to take, how to take, whom to share with, whom to deceive. You learn that the bread always crumbles a little when wet, that the meat can be stretched longer when hidden in bark. That honey can be thinned with water and still taste sweet to a starving tongue. But most importantly, you learn that food is not just sustenance. It is trust. It is power. Lycon never speaks of the moment in the storage hut, but you notice that afterward, he steps closer during drills, nods once when you hold your stance, shares a boiled root he'd hidden beneath his cloak. You are not friends. Sparta does not teach friendship, but there is something forming, something sharper, quieter, an alliance. One morning, a boy tries to steal openly during a communal meal. He rushes the bowl of figs, grabs two and runs. He is caught before he reaches the barracks. The instructors drag him to the center yard. He is made to kneel, but the punishment is not theirs to deliver. They call Lycon. And now, to your surprise, they call you. You step forward trembling. They hand you the rod. The boy looks at you with terror, but you, remembering the meal of shadows and salt, raise the rod and you strike. Once, not out of cruelty, but because in Sparta, mercy is shown through obedience. That night, you do not eat. You place your bread and meat upon the floor of the barracks, near the hearth, for the shadows, for the watchers, and for yourself. Because now, more than ever, you know the truth. You would not survive Sparta through strength, but through silence, through hunger, and through the unspoken rituals that fed more than the body. They fed the soul. The wall had always been there. It rose at the far end of the training yard, hewn from the same stone that built the city's heart. Rough, jagged, unadorned. It was not tall by the standards of great cities, but to a child it felt like the edge of the world. A steep climb, a test of courage, balance, and control. And one quiet afternoon, when the sun hung lazily above and the shadows stretched long, one boy climbed it. His name was Nicandros. You remember him not because he was remarkable, but because he wasn't. He was quiet, small, diligent. He never spoke out of turn. He completed every drill, even if he was slower, weaker. There was no defiance in him, only effort. That day, the instructors were gone. It happened sometimes, brief, deliberate absences to see what the boys would do, when unwatched. A test in itself. Nicandros had stood staring at the wall for what felt like hours. You had seen him, seated in the shade, eyes fixed on the top stones. No one approached. In Sparta, curiosity was a risk, and sympathy even worse. Then he moved, not with a shout or challenge, but as if sleepwalking, quiet, intentional. He placed one hand, then the other, found the grooves worn smooth by generations. Slowly, steadily, he climbed. You watched from across the yard. Some of the others glanced over but said nothing. No warnings, no jeers, just silence. Spartan boys did not prevent danger. They observed it, measured it, and then he slipped. It was sudden, like the wind changing. A foot missed its mark. Fingers fumbled for purchase. There was no scream, only the sound, thud, of a body meeting stone and dust. He did not move. You remember standing, unsure whether to run toward him or away. Your heart beat not just with fear, but confusion. What was the right thing to do? Sparta did not tell you. The instructors returned minutes later. They did not rush, did not cry out. Two of them approached the body. One knelt, felt for breath, then shook his head. Nicandros was dead. There was no funeral, no mourning. The boys were gathered that evening and told simply that the wall was not for climbing outside designated trials. Nicandros had disobeyed. That was all. You were dismissed. His bed remained empty. No one spoke his name, but you remembered. That night, you couldn't sleep. You lay awake, staring at the ceiling beams, listening to the slow, even breathing of the others. Outside, the wind pushed gently at the shutters. Somewhere, an owl called. The world moved on. untouched by one boy's fall. But in you, something had shifted. You rose before dawn and crept to the edge of the yard. The wall loomed, cast in bluish light. The same stone, the same silence. You stared at it for a long time, and you whispered, not loudly, just to yourself, Nicandros. A name forbidden now, but one that still echoed behind your ribs. In the weeks that followed, no one spoke of him. His belongings were removed. His absence went unmarked. But you noticed subtle things. A boy who had shared a meal with him now ate slower. Another who had once teased him now stared at his hands in silence. Even Lycon, hard-eyed and inscrutable, lingered once by the wall before turning away. The death had not broken Sparta's rules, but it had broken something else. One afternoon, an instructor posed a question, an unusual thing in Sparta. What is the greatest threat to a warrior? Some answered, fear, pain, the enemy. Others said weakness. The instructor shook his head. Memory, he said. Then he looked directly at you. To remember too much is to lose the present. A Spartan fights in the now, but you didn't forget. You couldn't. You remembered the curve of Nicandros's fingers on the stone, the dust rising as he fell, the silence that followed, and it made you question, for the first time, not whether you would survive Sparta, but whether you should. Later, during sparring, you faltered, not physically, mentally. Your thoughts drifted, your grip loosened. A blow landed hard against your ribs. You fell, gasping. The instructor approached. You expected rebuke, but he only crouched beside you, eyes narrow. You saw him fall, he said. You nodded. You still carry it. Again, you nodded. He said nothing more, just stood, turned, and walked away. No punishment, but no comfort. That too was a lesson. In the days that followed, the wall was used again for a sanctioned trial. Boys were ordered to climb it, touch the top stone, and descend in time. No one hesitated. When your turn came, you approached it with steady hands. Your fingers found the grooves, your feet gripped the ledges, and as you climbed, your mind cleared. Not of Nicandros. No, he was with you, but of fear. At the top you paused, looked out over the training yard, over the hills beyond, over a land that taught boys to forget. And then you touched the stone and climbed back down. Not because you were brave, but because you understood. In Sparta, the body was tested, but the soul was hunted. And you, my friend, would not survive that hunt. Not when silence became cruelty. Not when memory became a crime. Not when a boy could fall from a wall and vanish like dust, with no one left to say his name. There are moments in a Spartan boy's life that arrive without warning, like sudden storms above the mountain passes, dark, consuming, and absolute. The rite of thorns and ash was one such storm. It was not listed among the drills or schedules. It was not announced by trumpet or scroll. It came instead as a whisper carried by the older boys, their voices low and weighted, eyes flicking toward the hills. It was not for discussion. It was endured, and then remembered in silence, if one was lucky enough to return. You first heard of it one dusk, as twilight kissed the stones of the training yard in hues of bruised lavender. Lycon sat beside you, sharpening a blade of flint. His hands were slow, precise. He looked up only once. Tomorrow, he said, they'll take us. Where? He didn't answer. He didn't need to. His silence carried the shape of thorns. At sunrise, you were woken not by the instructors, but by a group of robed men, older, unfamiliar. Their cloaks bore a red stripe across the shoulder, a mark you hadn't seen before. Their faces were weathered and solemn, no smiles, no words of encouragement, only gestures. You and 12 others, chosen from the ranks, were led beyond the walls of the Agoj, through the narrow paths between olive groves, past the grazing fields and into the low hills where the heather grew in thick, tangled beds. The journey was long. No one spoke. Even the birds seemed to fall quiet. Eventually, the group arrived at a clearing, circular, ancient, its perimeter marked by standing stones, half buried and lichen-covered. At the centre was a fire pit. Cold for now. Around it lay coils of dry thorn branches, and beside them 3 shallow bowls, one filled with water, one with ash, and one with red clay. You were ordered to strip to your waist. The wind bit at your skin. Then the first trial began. Each boy was handed a thin reed, green, flexible, sharp. One by one, you were made to step barefoot through a path of thorn branches laid out like a winding serpent between the stones. But not slowly, not with caution. You were to run, barefoot, forward, unflinching. The first boy hesitated. The robed man nearest to him stepped forward, snatched the reed from his hand, and struck his back. Once, twice. The boy fell. He was dragged aside. Not disqualified. Not dismissed. Just removed. You didn't see him again. When your turn came, your heart thudded like a war drum. But you ran. The thorns sliced your soles. Blood followed each step. But you ran. When you reached the end, you collapsed. 2 men lifted you beneath your arms, carried you to the bowls. There, another man dipped his fingers into the ash and smeared it across your cheeks, your chest, your eyelids. You are no longer a child, he intoned. Then the clay, cool and thick, was pressed into your palms, forming shapes you did not understand. Symbols, runes, names perhaps, from a time before Sparta itself. Finally, the water, ice cold, poured over your feet, your wounds, not to cleanse, but to remind you what pain felt like when it stung anew. And this was only the beginning. What followed was a day and night of trials that blurred the edges of thought and body. You were ordered to dig with your bare hands into the hard earth until your nails cracked and bled. You were blindfolded and left to navigate a labyrinth of bramble and stone, guided only by whispers, some real, some imagined. You were made to carry a stone thrice your weight up a hill steep as a temple stair, knowing that if you failed to reach the summit before sunset, you would not return. Some boys screamed. One turned and fled into the trees. He did not come back. By nightfall, only 8 of the 12 remained. And then came the ash pit. The fire was lit. Branches crackled. Sparks rose like ghosts toward the moon. The remaining boys, including you, were led to its edge. Not to leap, not to burn, but to kneel, to face the flame, to stare into it without blinking, without speaking, for 1 full hour. A test not of flesh, but of mind. The heat was unbearable. Sweat poured from your skin, mingling with the dried blood and clay. Your legs trembled, but you stared, and in the flames, you saw faces. Your mother, Nicandros. The boy who fled. They spoke no words, only looked back at you with expressions that shifted between sorrow and pride. When the hour ended, you collapsed. This time, they let you lie. By dawn, 6 of you remained. You were handed your cloaks, not new ones, but your old garments, tattered, reeking of smoke and ash. Nothing had changed outwardly, but everything inside you had shifted. You had stepped into the fire, and you had not been consumed, but you were not whole either. When you returned to the barracks, the others made way, not in awe, but in recognition. They had all passed through their own right, at different times, and they bore the signs, the calloused feet, the reddened eyes, the new quiet. Lycon met your gaze. He said nothing, only nodded, and you nodded back, not as boys, but as survivors of something that had no name. only symbols in ash and thorns. That night, as you sat in silence beneath the stars, you felt a strange emptiness, not from pain, not from fear, but from knowing that something had been taken from you. Not your blood, but your softness, and in Sparta that was the highest offering. There are objects in life that carry a weight beyond their metal or wood. In Sparta, that object was the doru, the spear. It was not merely a weapon. It was an extension of the soul, a conduit of will. In the quiet of the training yard, you learned that the spear did not serve you, you served it. And for many, it was not the blade that wounded first, it was the expectation. You were 11 years old when they placed your first true spear into your hands. Until then, you had trained with wooden rods, dulled and harmless. They bruised your ribs, taught you balance, reminded you of pain, but they did not cut. This one did. The instructor said nothing as he laid the weapon before you. It was nearly as tall as you were, its shaft smooth and stained a deep brown from oil and old sweat. The head was iron, forged with a lethal elegance, sharp on one end, blunt on the other. The bottom spike was for planting into the ground or finishing a fallen foe. The top, that was meant for piercing the world. Your first lesson was simple. Hold the spear skyward, arms extended, until the sun touched the far pillar. It would take hours. Your arms burned within minutes. The other boys around you struggled too, their faces contorting with effort. You glanced at Lycon. His hands were steady, but blood had begun to trail down his wrist from the friction. No one was allowed to lower their arms. If you did, the punishment was swift. A lash, a blow, a return to the start. The weight was not just physical, it grew heavier with every passing heartbeat, as if the spear itself was testing your worth. And in that moment, you understood why many did not make it past this rite. The spear was unforgiving. After the pillar shadow passed, you were ordered to thrust, not at targets, at each other. Your sparring partner was a boy you barely knew, strong, tall, fast. His strikes came like lightning, his spear a blur. Yours felt heavy, clumsy. You parried once, twice, then missed. The shaft cracked against your ribs. You fell, breath stolen from your lungs. No one helped you up. The instructor waited. Again, he said. So you stood, and this time you did not think of pain, or failure, or fear. You thought of the sky, of that moment when you held the spear high, trembling, and saw beyond the courtyard walls. A vision of yourself, not as a boy, but as something sharper. You struck, and for the first time, your opponent faltered. That night, your hands were blistered and your forearms trembled with fatigue. You sat beside the fire, watching the flames curl upward like spear tips toward the stars. Lycon sat beside you. He held his spear like one might hold a sleeping animal, gentle but never careless. They name their spears, he said suddenly. Who? The elders, the ones who've gone to war. He traced a scar on the shaft of his weapon. They say the spear remembers the hands that hold it. If you fear, it grows heavier. If you hate, it grows crooked. You frowned. What if you hope? He looked at you, then it flies. The next morning brought the throwing trial. A long run, spear in hand, followed by a single chance. One throw toward a distant post set into the hill. Each boy ran, each boy threw, and each boy was judged not just by distance, but by silence. A cheer, even a murmur was forbidden. You were not here to celebrate. You were here to earn the right to hold the weapon again. When your turn came, the path stretched before you like a ribbon of sun-baked dust. You ran. Your legs ached. Your lungs screamed. And then, at the mark, you threw. The spear left your hand like a bird startled from a branch. It cut the air in a clean arc, and for one perfect moment it sang. Then it struck. Not the post, the ground, just inches beside it. Silence. Your failure echoed louder than any cry. But the instructors did not strike you. Instead, one approached, picked up the spear, and handed it back. "Try again," he said. "You stared, but I missed." He nodded. "So you'll learn." That was the lesson. Not perfection, persistence. In the weeks that followed, you grew into the spear. You learned its weight, its hum in the wind, the way it turned your breath into force. You learned to plant it in the dirt and sleep beside it, as though it were kin. You learned to sharpen it with flint and oil, murmuring to it as Lycon had shown. You gave it a name, not aloud, but in your heart. And when you carried it across the courtyard, others stepped aside, not in awe, but in understanding. You had earned it, but not all did. One boy, desperate to outshine the rest, threw his spear too soon during a mock skirmish. It struck another boy in the thigh. The wounded screamed. Blood soaked the sand. The instructors dragged both away. Only one returned, and when he did, he carried no spear. Only shame. You once believed war was the test of a Spartan, but now you saw the truth. The test was living beside the weapon, not in glory, but in silence, in sweat, in stillness, in the ache of shoulders raised to the sky for hours, trusting that someday the spear might fly. There was a tree that stood just beyond the western boundary of the Spartan training yard. Its roots coiled like serpents through sun-cracked earth, its branches splayed wide and low, casting a shade that never quite reached the walls. It was old, older than the Agogi, older, even, than some said Sparta itself. They called it Elia, the Olive Mother, and beneath her branches, things were whispered that would never be spoken within the barracks. You found your way to her one day in late summer, your spear slung over one shoulder, your hands caked with dirt from the morning's drills. The sun had burned cruelly overhead, and you had been punished for stumbling during a maneuver. 3 lashes across your back, delivered without a word. You did not cry, but your soul felt brittle. That day, the olive tree became your refuge. Lycon was already there, seated cross-legged in the dry soil, sharpening a blade with slow, meditative strokes. His eyes lifted as you approached, but he did not speak. He simply gestured to a flat stone beside him. You sat, and for a long while, there was only the sound of wind through leaves. Gentle, almost kind, a rarity in your world. Finally, he spoke. "Do you know why they never cut her down?" You glanced at the tree's thick trunk, gnarled and hollow in places. "Because she's old?" Lycon shook his head. "Because she listens." You frowned. "Trees don't listen." "They do," he said quietly, "if you learn how to speak without words." What followed was not a lesson in battle. It was something else entirely. Lycon reached into a pouch at his side and pulled out 3 olive pits, dried and smooth. He placed them in your palm. "One of these is poisoned," he said. Your stomach tightened. "How do I know which?" He leaned back, eyes on the rustling canopy above. "You don't. That's the point." Then he added, "But in war, you'll drink what's given. You'll eat what you find. And you'll watch others fall because they trusted wrongly." You looked at the pits. Identical. He did not explain further, only watched. And in time, you understood. It was not about guessing correctly. It was about how you moved, how you watched him, what his fingers lingered on, how his breath paused when he passed a certain pit. You handed one back. He smiled faintly. "You're learning." The olive tree became more than a resting place. It became a silent school. Each week, a small group of older boys gathered beneath her shade, not to spar, but to study. Not books or letters, but the language of quiet survival. You learned how to track a man by the pattern of crushed grass, how to read a campfire by its smoke, white for green wood, dark for meat cooking, almost invisible for discipline, how to lie, convincingly by telling partial truths, how to disappear without running. These were the lessons that no instructor ever mentioned. They were passed hand to hand, from scarred fingers to eager ones, in silence and shade. You came to crave them more than food, because in them you saw a different kind of strength. One Sparta did not shout about, but one it used most. One evening, as the cicadas hummed low in the trees, Lycon handed you a folded scrap of cloth, black, thin, unmarked. "Put it on," he said. You obeyed, tying it over your eyes. "Now find me." The world went dark. You listened, heart pounding, for a sound, a breath, a footfall. Nothing. Then a whisper. At your ear, though you were certain he had stood meters away. "You cannot survive Sparta if you only fight in the light." The cloth was removed. Lycon stood behind you, hands at his sides, calm as still water. "Learn to hear," he said. "Learn to wait." Then he pointed toward the barracks, where smoke from the evening cookfires drifted in the wind. "Out there, the spear is not your weapon." He tapped your temple. "This is." Not long after, a boy was caught eavesdropping beneath the olive tree. He had not been invited. He had not earned the shadow. The instructors came swiftly. They dragged him away, screaming, kicking, begging. He did not return. That night, no one spoke. Even Lycon looked shaken. The lesson was cruel and clear. Some knowledge in Sparta was not taught. It was given, and those who tried to take it were removed. You returned to the olive tree many times after that, not always to meet others. Sometimes to sit alone, hand pressed to the soil, listening. You began to understand what Lycon had meant. The rustle of leaves could reveal who approached. The scent in the wind told what was burning in the kitchens, and how many mouths it must feed. The ants that marched across your foot carried news from some forgotten crevice in the compound. A crumb stolen, a root disturbed. The world whispered. And under Elia, you learned how to listen. But most of all, you learned that Sparta's greatest weapon was not strength, nor pain, nor fear, but silence. And it was under that silence, under the weight of that patient old tree, that you felt the quiet sorrow of who you once were begin to fade. Because the boy you had been, the one who cried when hungry, who flinched at shadows, who dreamed of freedom, he could not survive here. But the boy who watched the ants, the one who named his spear and counted footsteps in the dark, he just might. Victory in Sparta was not marked with trumpets or garlands. There were no festivals, no applause, no garish displays of glory. Triumph wore a quiet mask, and its crown was not golden. It was made of leaves, the laurel, but do not mistake it for gentleness. The laurel was sacred to Apollo, the god of truth and light. But in Sparta, it bore another meaning, not of poetry, but of precision, not of grace, but of endurance. To wear the laurel was to be seen and to be tested. You first saw it up close on the brow of a boy named Theron. He was older than you, already near the edge of boyhood, where manhood waited with calloused hands. His eyes were narrow, calculating. Not cruel, but cold. He never shouted, never raised his fist. But when Theron entered the training yard, others instinctively straightened their backs. He had earned the laurel during the Night of Knives, an annual trial whispered of in half stories, wrapped in rumour. They said it took place beyond the Parnan hills, where the air grew thin and beasts still howled after dusk. They said boys entered the woods with nothing but a short blade and left with proof. Proof not just of survival, but of conquest. No one explained what that meant. But Theron returned bloodied, silent, bearing a tattered wolf's pelt and a cut across his cheek that never healed clean. Upon his brow they placed the laurel, not woven, not tied, but pressed, still green, its ends stained with blood. You were summoned weeks later. The elders came at twilight, their robes the same red as the dying sky. They called only 3 names. Yours was the last. You did not cheer. You did not ask why. You simply rose, because to ask was to doubt, and doubt had no place in the Agog. The walk to the shrine took hours. This was not the same as the earlier rites. There were no thorn paths, no instructors, no shouting, only silence and shadow. Each boy was handed a band of cloth, black, with a single laurel leaf stitched at the center. You will return by dawn, one of the elders said, or not at all. Then he placed a finger to your chest. The blood you spill must be your own or another's. The words clung to your skin like ash. They left you in the forest. Darkness fell fast, thick with pine and distant howls. The moon hung like a silent sentinel overhead, casting silver light through the tangled canopy. You moved in silence, bare, feet whispering over moss and root. Somewhere, to your right, a branch snapped. You froze, your hand closed around the hilt of your short blade. No torch, no fire, only your breath and your memory of the forest paths. Then a flicker of movement, too tall to be a wolf. Another boy. You lowered your blade. The rules were unwritten but understood. You could not kill unless forced. But the forest did not care for mercy. Time unraveled. Hours passed in measured heartbeats. You did not sleep. You did not eat. You watched the trees for signs, scratches on bark, bent stems, the glint of eyes in the dark. And then you heard it. Low growl, not close, but coming. You knelt, pressing your ear to the earth. Pause, four-legged, fast. You stood slowly, raising your blade, and from the underbrush, a shape burst forth. Not a wolf, a dog, feral, starved, its ribs showing through its hide. A leftover from a hunt, perhaps, or a pet abandoned long ago and swallowed by the forest. It lunged. You sidestepped. Its teeth grazed your leg. Pain lanced. Up your thigh, hot and swift. You struck, not with grace, but with fear. The blade caught its side. It yelped, twisted, fled. You collapsed. Blood welled from your leg, hot and sticky, but you did not scream. Instead, you tore your cloth band and pressed it to the wound. Then, trembling, you followed the trail the beast had left behind. At dawn, you returned, your cloak torn, your hands red. In your arms, the carcass of the feral dog, not whole, not ceremonial, but undeniable. The elders examined it without expression. They did not speak. They took your cloth, now stained, and wrapped it around your brow. Then they crowned it with 3 laurel leaves, damp with morning dew. You felt no pride, only silence, only pain, only a strange, heavy stillness in your chest. When you rejoined the others, they did not speak your name, but they saw the laurel. They stepped aside, and you walked through them, not as a victor, not as a boy, but as one more shade among the living dead. Later, Lycon approached. He did not comment on the crown. He only placed a hand on your shoulder, rough and calloused. "You're bleeding again," he said. You looked down. Your leg wound had reopened. But you felt nothing, only the weight of the laurel, resting just above your brow. A reminder that even honor demands blood. That night, you dreamed of the dog. But in the dream, it spoke. Its voice was your own. "You killed me," it said. "But I fed you, and when you awoke, you understood." The laurel was not a prize. It was a scar, a leaf-shaped echo of a truth you would carry forever. You could survive Sparta, but not without losing something sacred, something soft, something that once made you human. Winter did not come to Sparta with flurries or frost-covered meadows. The snow rarely fell in the valleys, and the river Eurotas flowed on, quiet and unyielding. But still, the cold came, slow and creeping, like the breath of some forgotten god, older than war. It came not from the sky, it came from the stone. The barracks in winter were merciless. There was no fire within. Spartan boys were not granted flames. To warm oneself was indulgence. To shiver was training. At night, your limbs curled in instinctive defense, your body seeking shelter within itself. The thin woolen cloak that once merely felt inadequate now became your sole defense against the deep, bone-deep chill. And it was never enough. Your breath fogged in the dark, frost formed at the edge of the wooden beams, and still you lay on stone. The instructors called it noshairon, the cold hour. Each morning before the sun, you were woken and marched outside barefoot, cloaks damp with dew, into the grey quiet of dawn. There, you trained, not to build muscle or skill, but to suffer. You swung wooden swords with frozen fingers. You ran, laps until your soul split from the frost-hardened earth. You plunged into the river, silent, shivering, swallowing your cries with every breath. If a boy coughed, he was made to carry a stone until his arms gave out. If one fell behind in the run, he was whipped with reeds dipped in ice water. No one complained, no one asked why, because the cold was the curriculum. But this cold was more than temperature. It became presence, a thing you could feel behind you, watching. It seeped into your joints, your jaw, your chest. It numbed not just your skin, but your thoughts. There were days you forgot your own name, nights when you felt your teeth chatter long after they had stopped, and always the stone beneath you. It remembered every shiver, every moment you failed to hide it. One boy, Actor, had been strong in the summer. He was tall, swift, never missed a strike during combat drills, but the winter undid him. You watched as his edges dulled, his steps slowed. He stopped speaking. He grew thin, eyes sunken, face pale. One morning, during the river plunge, he didn't rise. Lycan dove after him, dragging him to the shore. The instructor stood by, unmoved. They watched the boy cough, sputter, collapse, and then they carried him away. No one said if he survived, but his bed remained empty. His name was not spoken again. That night, Lycan did something strange. He handed you a small stone, smooth, warm from his palm. "Keep this in your hand," he said. You frowned. Why? Because it reminds you there's something warmer than the stone beneath you. You didn't ask where he got it or how long he'd carried it, but you clutched it beneath your cloak like treasure, and for the first time in days, you slept without shaking. The cold was not always outside. Some days, it lived in you, a feeling that grew slow and quiet inside your chest. You stopped laughing, though laughter was rare even before. You stopped dreaming, though dreams were often cruel. You became a shape beneath a cloak, a pair of eyes, a pair of feet. You moved, you trained, you obeyed, you endured. And yet, something in you began to crack, not from pain, from absence. One morning, as frost still clung to the ground, you found a bird on the training field, small, dead, its wings stiff with ice. You picked it up without thinking. Its body was light, too light. You wrapped it in your cloak and buried it beside the olive tree. Lycan saw you, but said nothing. The next day, a laurel leaf was placed beside your morning ration. No explanation, no comment, just a gesture. A silent acknowledgement that even in the cold, someone had noticed the warmth you kept alive. But the cold tested more than kindness. It tested identity. One day, an instructor asked, "Who are you?" A boy answered, "Spartan." Another, "Weapon." A third, "Shadow." You were last. You hesitated, then whispered, "Stone." The instructor stared long at you, then nodded once, because in Sparta, That answer was not defeat, it was evolution. You had become what they needed, what they required, what survived. Years later, though you did not count years, only trials, you were told something you never forgot. The body forgets pain, but it remembers cold. At the time, you didn't understand, but now you do, because even long after you left the barracks, long after you earned your spear, long after the snowless winters passed into memory, you would still wake some nights with your hands curled tight, grasping for a warm stone that was no longer there. And this, dear friend, is why you would not survive a day in Sparta, not because you lack strength, not because you fear pain, but because you do not know the cold that lives in stone, and once it enters you, it never leaves. Sparta, famed for her silence, her steel, her scarless pride, was not always without song. Long before men bled for her in foreign soil, before boys were broken and reshaped in her cruel forge, Sparta was a place of rhythm, the breath of flutes, the heartbeat of drums, and the gentle hum of the kithara once lingered in her twilight like a memory refusing to fade. The elders said that music taught order, that melody was the mirror of discipline, and harmony was the mother of unity. And so, even in the agoj, even amid scraped knees, torn cloaks, and endless drills, music was allowed, barely. It guided marching feet, it steadied trembling hands, it told the sun when to rise, and boys when to strike. But all songs have their end, and one morning, without warning, the music stopped. You remember it vividly, more than any blow or wound. It was the 4th day after the first frost. The sky was clear, a blue so cold it felt sharp. The boys had assembled in the training yard as always, lines neat, bodies alert. You, Lycon, and the others waited for the instructor's signal, and then nothing. No flute, no pipe, no slow, steady beat to signal the start of formation. Only silence. A full, echoing silence that rang louder than any drum. It was Theron who first shifted. A single twitch of the hand, unsure whether to begin without the note. Then the instructor appeared, not marching, not blowing the signal horn, just walking, his face a shadow of stone. There will be no music today, he said, and then he turned and left. That was all. No explanation, no reason, only absence, and that, in Sparta, was more terrifying than command. The day's drills were clumsy. Without rhythm, the phalanx pattern faltered, shields clashed too early. Spears tilted at uneven angles. A boy misstepped during a backward maneuver and took a staff to the temple. Blood ran. He did not rise. No one moved to help. The training did not pause. Lycon's jaw tightened beside you. He said nothing. But the song had gone out of his stance. At dusk, after the yard was cleared and rations given, you found yourself pacing along the temple path, a worn stone walk between the sleeping quarters and the elder's shrine. That's where you saw him, Kalen. He was younger than you, small-boned, soft-voiced. His hands always moved like he was tuning invisible strings. He shouldn't have survived the agoj this long, but he had something no one else did. A song in his bones. And there, beneath the olive arch, he held it again. A lyre, small, rough, handmade, perhaps stolen from one of the storage huts or carved in secret. You froze. He looked up, not frightened, not ashamed. I didn't play it, he whispered. Not today. Then, after a breath, he added, but it wanted to be heard. He strummed one note, soft. So soft it could have been wind through reeds, and yet it cracked you open. It reminded you of your mother's voice, of nights before Sparta, of warmth that had no cost, and then it was gone. The next morning, Kalen was missing. By noon, his lyre was found, snapped in two, the strings cut. At dusk, the instructors summoned the boys. They made you stand in a circle. And there, in the center, they placed Kalen on his knees. His face was bruised, his hands bound behind his back. One elder stepped forward. "This city does not sing," he said. And then he raised the rod. Each strike fell without ceremony, without cruelty, just duty. Callan did not cry. He did not make a sound, and when it was done, they carried him away. No one saw him again. From that day forward, the music did not return. Not the morning pipe, not the steady rhythm of practiced drums, not the chants before, trial. And slowly, something shifted in the boys. You noticed it in drills, in the quiet shuffle of steps where once there had been unity, in the dull clatter of shields that no longer struck together. You noticed it in dreams, too. They grew colder, not filled with screams, but with stillness, an eerie void. One evening, Lycan led you to the olive tree. There, beneath its ancient limbs, he knelt and placed something between you. A reed, roughly carved. Hollow. "You carve it," he said. "Why?" He tilted his head. "To remember. You shaped it slowly, clumsily. It made no music, but when you blew across the top, it whistled. Just once. A dry, fragile sound. But you both smiled, because it was something. From then on, the music lived only in your movements. In the way you struck your foot 3 times before battle. In the way you tapped your fingers along the shaft of your spear when nervous. In the way Lycon breathed before a throw. Slow, steady, always in 4 counts. The songs were gone, but they had not died. They had hidden themselves in your marrow. You, friend, could not survive this silence, not because it hurts, but because it deceives. You would search for the song, you would ask why it ended, you would mourn its loss. And in Sparta, mourning is forbidden, only silence remains. There were festivals in Sparta, but they were not feasts of laughter and indulgence. They were sharpened with ritual, bound in ash and blood, woven with the threads of obedience and shadow. Among them, none was older or more whispered than Carnaia, ostensibly a festival for Apollo. In truth, something older, something that existed before names were carved into stone. You did not expect to be chosen. You had already survived the spear trials, the silent seasons, the bitter frost that turned boys into granite. But Carnaia was different. It was not for the body, it was for the soul. The evening before the rites, an elder approached you in the quiet after last meal. He placed a black ribbon into your palm, embroidered with a single white spiral. You said nothing. He said nothing. But Lycon, seated across the fire pit, nodded once. He had received his ribbon 2 years before. He bore its mark on his forearm still. 3 lines, thin and pale, like old roots. You tied the ribbon around your wrist that night, and you did not sleep. At dawn, they took you beyond the fields, past the olive groves, past even the mountain shrines, to a stone basin sunk into the ground, half concealed by overgrown vines and yellowing brush. There were 7 of you, barefoot and cloaked. The air was thick, with smoke from burning sage. The earth beneath you hummed. An elder drew a circle around the basin with crushed charcoal and salt. Another chanted in a tongue you did not understand, low and rhythmic. Then the bindings began. Each boy was paired with another, matched not by rank, not by strength, but by some silent law of shared endurance. You were paired with Menon, a boy from the southern valley, dark-eyed, quiet, with a wound on his collarbone that never healed properly. You trained beside him many times, shared meals, shared silences. But you had never looked at him the way you did now, as a mirror, as the one you must bleed with, and for. They handed you both a sharpened reed, the blade no wider than a leaf. You were told to kneel, then to press the reed into your own forearm, slowly, deliberately, until the blood flowed. No one moved until it dripped into the stone basin. Only then were you permitted to touch each other's wound, flesh to flesh, warm blood to warm blood. The elder's voice rose like wind. Among trees, you are no longer alone, he intoned. What wounds one, wounds both. What strengthens one, strengthens the other. Then he drew a symbol in ash across your joined arms. 2 serpents, entwined. The pain was not great, but what followed was, you were ordered to remain bound at the wrist for 1 full cycle of the sun. 24 hours. Together, every step, every task, every silence. If one fell behind, the other was punished. If one was struck, both bore the lash. If one failed to answer a question, both received the rebuke. You learned within hours how to breathe together, how to turn without twisting the cord, how to anticipate each other's thoughts. It was not about trust, it was about surrender. At midday, Menon stumbled during a sparring sequence. You felt the sting of the instructor's rod across your back before your brain registered the fault. You did not blame him, because he was you. By sundown, your feet were blistered, your mouths dry, your bond unbreakable, not because it was sacred, but because it had cost something. Blood, time, obedience. That night you lay beneath the stars, still tethered. Menon whispered, "They say this is the only love Sparta permits." You said nothing. But in your silence, you understood. This was not love in the way of poets or mothers. It was dependence. If he died tomorrow, a part of you would too. And that was the point. Sparta did not raise warriors. It wove them, threaded them into each other, so tightly that if one strand frayed, the entire cloth unraveled. At dawn, the elder returned. He burned the cord with a coal from the fire. You flinched, not from heat, but from parting. Then he smeared both your wounds with ash. "The world will not see this bond," he said, "but you will feel it forever." He turned and left. No farewell, no praise, only the whisper of wind through trees. In the days after, you and Menon remained close, not through words, but in glances, shared meals, shifts in formation. You carried each other's burdens without asking, and though your arms healed, the scar never fully faded. 3 dots, like a constellation, like a promise. And that, friend, is why you would not survive in Sparta. Not because of the lash, not because of hunger, but because of what it takes to bind yourself to another, to let your pain live outside your own body, to love without the luxury of kindness. Only blood, only ash, only the unspoken vow that one must fall with you or never fall at all. There are some trials in Sparta that do not shout. They do not draw blood in the yard. They do not pit boy against boy beneath the gaze of instructors. They are quiet, and in that quiet, they become the most feared of all. One such trial is not listed in the records. Its name is spoken rarely and never twice in the same night. It is called the Quiet Blade. You did not know you had been chosen until the moment came. There was no announcement, no scroll, no signal, only a knock at your shoulder as the moon clung low on the horizon. You had just returned from spear drills. Your cloak was still damp with sweat. The barracks were dark. A tall figure in a black cloak placed a length of cloth in your palm. Black, soft, unmarked. He pointed to your eyes. You knew what to do. You wrapped the cloth across your face and followed. You were led through corridors that felt unfamiliar. The air changed, became colder, earthier. Your feet touched stone, then sand, then packed dirt. You turned too many times to remember the way back. You passed through stillness so perfect you could hear the blood in your ears. At last, the hand at your back stopped. then left you. You stood alone in darkness. And then a voice spoke. Not near, not far. Begin. That was all. No direction, no instruction, just the breath of the unknown. And so you stepped forward, blind. The air smelled of oil, sweat, and pine resin. The floor beneath your feet sloped unevenly, and your fingers soon met cold wall. You traced your way through narrow spaces, groping blindly, until your hand fell upon something strange, smooth, wooden, and warm from touch. A blade, small, curved, a dagger carved of dense olive wood, sharpened to a fine edge. You wrapped your fingers around it. It fit your hand like it had always belonged there. And that was when you understood. This was no ordinary trial. This was a test of silence itself. As you moved, the ground changed again, a soft rustling beneath your feet. Sand? No. Leaves. They had spread dried leaves along the floor. Every misstep would betray sound. Every stumble would announce you. You breathed through your nose, held your blade close, moved slowly. Then, there, a presence, breathing, shallow, ahead of you, someone else, another boy. You waited, listened. His foot shifted, a whisper of linen. You moved aside just in time. A wooden blade scraped your shoulder. Not hard, just enough to warn. This was not a duel. This was a dance, a test not of victory, but of disappearance. The passage narrowed. At times you had to crawl, the dirt dry and bitter in your mouth. You heard others, barely. A cough here, a misstep there. One boy yelped and was silenced. You never heard him again. At last, the tunnel opened into a wide, echoing chamber. A drop in air pressure. You had entered the chamber of the Watchers. There was light here, barely. Flickering torches placed in alcoves, too far to see clearly, but the blindfold remained. You felt the heat of their presence. They sat in silence. You knew because they said nothing. The Watchers, elders too old or skilled to waste words, were the final test. They were placed in a ring, seated cross-legged, unmoving. At the center was a symbol, a pendant carved from bone, suspended on a thin string between two low-standing stones. Your task was to take it, without sound. You crept forward. The leaves had vanished now, only smooth stone remained. You crouched, listened. Your heartbeat threatened to betray you. You reached. A whisper of motion. One Watcher shifted. You froze. Then again, slow. Your fingers touched the pendant. It was cold. You lifted it free. The string did not resist. No sound. You turned. And then, as you stepped away, barely half a breath from freedom, another boy brushed your arm. Panic surged. But neither of you cried out. He stopped, waited. You passed. That moment, the sharing of space, of danger, of unspoken choice, was part of the test. You later learned he failed because he stepped too quickly after you, and the sound of his sandals scuffed the floor. He vanished from the agog the next day. At dawn, they removed your blindfold. You stood once again in the upper court of the training ground, where the stones were dry and the sky painted itself in pale rose. A cup of water was handed to you. You drank, not for thirst, but for rebirth. The elder nodded once. You may speak. You did not. Because in Sparta, silence after trial was louder than any declaration. The dagger was never mentioned again, but it lived with you, in the way you stepped into a room without drawing gaze, in the way you knew how to vanish between moments, in the way you remembered that every sound cost something. You would not survive the quiet blade, not because it's cruel, but because it teaches you to exist without leaving a mark. And for most, that's the hardest thing of all, to become nothing and survive it. Sparta was a land of rules and silence, of stone and ritual. But above all, it was a land that listened to the sky, to the wind, to the will of the gods. You were taught early, never presume to understand Olympus. The gods did not love as men do. They did not comfort. They watched, they measured, and they spoke, rarely and never twice. But they did speak, until one day they didn't. The signs had been subtle at first. The morning mist failed to rise from the river. A calf was born with no eyes. The wind howled for 2 nights, then fell silent for 3. The elders noticed. You noticed too. Even the olive trees, normally steady in their silence, bent strangely in the afternoons, as though listening for something that would not come. Then came the day of sacrifice. A black goat was chosen, sleek, unblemished, its eyes wild with knowing. You, along with the rest of the boys, were summoned before the temple of Artemis Orthia. The altar was prepared, the flames readied, the prayers spoken, and the blade drawn. The goat fell in silence. Its blood steamed in the morning air. The priests burned the offering, scattered ash into the wind, read the cracks in bone, and waited. But nothing came. No shifting clouds, no omen in the sky, no cry from the ravens overhead. The fire burned straight. The bones fell clean. The smoke rose in a narrow column, undisturbed. The elders exchanged glances. Their lips tightened, their eyes narrowed. But none of them spoke aloud what you all felt. The gods were gone. In the days that followed, unease settled like dust on every surface. Spears splintered in drills. One of the temple dogs refused to eat for 3 days, then walked into the hills and never returned. 2 boys grew fevered and forgot their names. Another stood in the courtyard at night, speaking to someone no one else could see. He was removed by morning. Still, no signs, no dreams, no visitations. The sacred birds did not return to the fields. The acolytes who tended the flames reported that the fires now flickered cold. Even the priests stopped whispering their nightly prayers. They began to speak of practical things, of water and rations and discipline, not of fate, not of Apollo. One morning, Lycan carved something into the base of the old training post with his dagger. You saw it as the sun was rising, a single word. Empty. When you asked him what it meant, he did not answer. He only pressed his hand to the earth. The gods used to live here, he said. Now they've moved out. That week, the elders announced a new rite. It had no name, no history. It would not be added to the records. But you were told to kneel in the dust of the temple square. Each boy was given a pinch of ash from the sacrificial fire and told to mark their foreheads with it. This is your voice, the priest said, and now you will listen. You sat in the dust, sun rising, breath held, waiting, and you listened to the silence, to the weight of unanswered prayers, to the echo of gods who no longer replied. The silence became louder than any cry. One boy wept, another whispered the name of his mother. A third tried to sing, softly, a song of Artemis he remembered from childhood. The priest struck him across the mouth. No songs, he said. They are not listening. By dusk, the boys were dismissed. But no one stood immediately. No one ran. They simply rose, slowly, as though the weight of divine absence had stiffened their limbs. And that night, not one of them slept. Not truly. You lay awake, staring at the ceiling beam, asking questions you had never dared before. Who are we? What are we for? What is left, if not the gods? Sparta had always said, endure, endure for Sparta, endure for your brothers, endure for glory. But now the purpose felt thinner, hollow, like a temple with no statue, a prayer with no God. And that, dear friend, is why you would not survive. Not because of the cold, not because of pain, but because you still need the gods to listen. You still expect an answer, and in Sparta, the silence was the answer, and it was final. In Sparta, you were not born with a name. You were born with a sound, a call from your mother's lips perhaps, or a whisper from your father as he looked down at the small wrinkled child placed in his arms. A sound meant for comfort, for recognition, for love. But the agoge taught you early. Such names were borrowed, temporary. They belonged to the boy you once were, not the Spartan you were being carved into. A true name came later. It came in dust, in silence, in the presence of those who had forgotten what gentleness felt like. And it was not given, it was earned. You had heard of the ceremony for years, though no one spoke of it directly. Older boys would disappear for a night, returning quieter, changed, their backs straighter, their voices deeper. And then suddenly they had names. Not childhood names, not family names, but names sharp as spears, quiet as blades. Phoros, the bearer. Myron, the silent. Thalos, the black-winged. Names that clung to them like shadows, never slipping. Names that stayed even when the boy himself did not. Your time came after the second frost. The wind had turned dry, and the morning stones bit at your feet with sharper teeth. That evening, as you rubbed oil into your bruised wrists after drills, an elder approached and placed something in your hand, a strip of linen, stiff with dried ash. You said nothing. He said nothing, but your stomach curled inward. You knew. That night, you were summoned beyond the barracks, to the broken colonnade on the edge of the outer yard. The moon hung low, veiled by thin clouds, and the ground was covered in fine dust, the say kind that curled around your ankles, light and dry as bone. 7 boys waited in a half circle, cloaks wrapped tight. They looked at you, and in their eyes was something new. Not rivalry, not camaraderie, but understanding. You stepped into the circle. The elder stood in the center, beside a basin of clay and oil mixed with blood, still warm, dark, fragrant with iron and something older. He did not speak at first, only looked at each of you in turn. Then, with a voice deep as roots, he said, "Tonight, you speak the name of the one who no longer exists." You each knelt, took the reed stylus offered, and on the smooth square of dust before you, you wrote one word, the word no one else would see, the word that no longer belonged to you. For some, it was the name their mother had used. For others, it was a memory. For you, it was a secret, one you had kept locked behind your teeth since your first winter in the Agog. You wrote it slowly, pressing the reed deep. When the elder passed behind you, he did not look down. He did not need to. The dust would remember. After the last name was buried in silence, the elder scattered the basin's mixture across the dust. It hissed as it touched the earth, marking every name with dark, permanent stain. Then he lifted a new reed, plain, uncarved, and pointed it at the first boy. "You will speak what remains," he said, and so began the naming. Each boy stepped forward, not to proclaim, but to accept. A name was spoken over him, not his own choice, but the sum of his deeds, his endurance, his silence. One by one, they received their new selves. One by one, the circle of dust became a circle of identity. Then it was your turn. You stood. Your heart did not race. Your breath did not shake. But inside your ribs, something moved. The elder looked at you. He spoke a name. It was not the one you expected. It meant the foreign breath, Xenon. You did not understand, but you accepted it because in Sparta, understanding was not required, only endurance. They marked your forehead with ash. They placed a cloth band around your wrist, tied in 3 knots, and they handed you a polished stone etched with the name. "Bury this beneath your bed," the elder said. "It will remember for you." Then they turned and left. The dust settled. The night closed in. You returned to the barracks in silence. None of the boys spoke as you walked past, but when you lay down, Menon pressed his hand to your shoulder. "Xenon," he whispered, and something inside you anchored, not to who you had been, but to who you had now become. That night, you did not dream. You listened to the stone breathing beneath your bed. And in the quiet, the boy with no name finally slept. You would not survive this, friend. Not because you could not earn a name, but because you would try to keep the first, and, in Sparta, the first name must always die, for the second to be born. There are rituals in Sparta that are spoken of only in silence. Traditions passed not by scroll or speech, but by the absence they leave behind. An empty bed, a cloak folded at dawn, a missing name no one dares utter again. Among these, none were more dreaded than what the elders called the choosing of the circle. But to the boys of the Agog, it had a darker name, the Night of the Red Circle. You did not know it was coming. No one ever did. It began without warning, as most things in Sparta did. A horn, low, distant, sounded across the barracks just before midnight. You awoke with a start, your hand instantly on your cloak, your other on the hilt of your knife. No light was lit, only shadows shifted. Lycon rose beside you without a word. He had heard the horn before. You had not. You followed the sound through the silent halls. Barefoot, your feet found the path even in darkness. So well worn were your steps by now. At the threshold of the outer yard, each boy was stopped. A strip of red cloth was handed to you. A circle, painted in thick dye, stained its center. You were told to tie it around your arm and step forward. Nothing else. No explanation. Just that crimson shape, pulsing like a wound. The yard had been cleared. Only a ring of torches remained, planted deep into the earth, forming a wide circle. Within that circle, nothing but dirt, dust, and breath. Each boy entered and took his place. 23 in total, each bearing the mark, each uncertain, each waiting for what came next. Then the elders arrived. They circled you slowly, their sandals whispering across the ground. One carried a staff tipped with iron, another a long scroll bound in leather. But it was the third that mattered. He held a small clay jar, within it, oil and red pigment. He dipped his finger in, then approached the first boy, and without warning, marked a second circle upon the boy's chest, a second red mark. The rest of you froze, because now there was division, a circle within a circle. They moved down the line, marking some, skipping others. There was no visible pattern, no hint of criteria. You felt your breath catch as the priest neared. He looked at you, then moved on. Your chest remained bare, and so it went until 10 boys bore 2 marks. 13 did not. Then came the command, circle to center. The 10 marked boys stepped into the middle of the torchlight. Their eyes searched the crowd, some with pride, some with fear, some with nothing at all. Then the elder with the scroll unrolled it and read, "Tonight, you do not fight your enemy, you fight your equal." You were handed a stave, light, polished, no blade, and told to watch, to remember, to witness. The boys in the center faced one another and began. It was not a sparring match. It was not practice. It was judgment. Each pair fought not for points, not for technique, but for dominance, for acknowledgement, for survival of place. The dust rose thick, sweat fell like rain. 2 boys were knocked unconscious. One limped away, arm hanging limp. The final pair, Lycon and a taller boy named Erastos fought in a silence so heavy it seemed to slow time. Erastos struck first, then again. Lycon moved like water, not fast, not brutal, but inevitable. When the fight ended, Erastos was on the ground, breathing but unmoving. Lycon did not raise his hands. He simply turned and walked back to the outer ring. Then the jar returned. The elder with the red pigment walked the circle again, and this time the second mark was wiped clean from the chests of all but 3. 3 remained, still bearing the double circle, still burning red. You were told nothing more that night. No reward, no punishment, just a single phrase spoken. To the 3, you are now bound to the inner circle. What that meant you would only learn in pieces. They were watched more closely, their meals quieter, their trials more cruel, but they never cried out. And when they disappeared for a week and returned with fresh scars and no words, none of you asked where they had gone. One night, as the rain whispered against the roof of the barracks, you turned to Lycon. You wanted the second circle? He didn't answer at first, then said, no. Why not? Because some circles don't. Close, they consume. You would not survive that night, friend. Not because of the fight, but because you would ask why you were passed over. You would wonder if the mark meant worth or danger. You would search for fairness. But Sparta has no fairness. Only fire, only circles drawn in blood, and whether you are chosen to stand inside or left outside to watch, you are always, always burning. There are paths in Sparta that leave no map. Roads walked not for travel, but for shedding, for forgetting, for becoming something less human, more enduring. They called it the Iron Road, not for what lay beneath your feet, but for what it demanded from your spirit. It began with a whisper, a quiet word from the quartermaster after evening meal. Pack light. Then a sack was handed to you, empty, save for 2 strips of dried meat, a skin of river water, and a single iron nail. No explanation, no direction, only the faintest command. Follow the road. You knew of it, of course. Boys who returned from it bore changed eyes. They spoke less, moved slower, stood straighter. Some never returned at all. Their names were not spoken. They simply ceased. At dawn, you set out. No escort, no teacher, only silence and the road. A narrow trail winding into the foothills, marked only by iron nails driven into trees every few hundred steps, faint rust stains trickling down bark like old tears. Each nail had once belonged to a shield, or a sword, or a door that no longer opened. They marked the way forward. They never pointed back. The first day passed in stillness. The forest, once familiar from childhood games and gathering trials, now felt foreign. Your footsteps made too much noise, your breath too loud. Even the rustling of your cloak made your nerves twitch. The iron road did not tolerate noise. You learned quickly to step differently, to walk as though you were not there. By midday, you passed the first marker, a stone circle half buried in moss. Within it, the skeleton of a bird, picked clean, wings folded. You bowed, not from superstition, but from knowing. That creature had followed the road too. At sunset, the wind changed. It carried the scent of iron and burning wood. You followed it down a narrow descent into a dry riverbed where an old campfire had been left. Still warm. Someone else was on the road, maybe ahead, maybe behind, but unseen. That, too, was part of the lesson. The second day came without sunlight. A fog had rolled in overnight, thick and still. Your skin felt damp, your bones heavy. You walked anyway. The nails in the trees grew further apart now. Sometimes you nearly missed them. You learned to listen, not to sound, but to absence. The absence of birdsong, the absence of flowing water, the absence of your own voice. You hadn't spoken in over a day. You hadn't needed to. By the third day, your body began to ache. Not with injury, with transformation. The silence became a pressure, like armor being forged around your ribs. You began to remember less. Faces blurred. Voices faded. You no longer missed them. Only the road remained. Then came the fork. 2 trails, both marked with nails, but one veered upward toward rocky cliffs. The other dipped low into marsh. You stood for a long time. No sign, no rule, no answer. So you chose the harder path. Not because it was noble, because the silence told you to. The rocks cut your feet. Your cloak tore. You lost your meat ration to a gust of wind and watched it tumble into a ravine without emotion. You drank from a stream where lizards curled around sun-warmed stone, and you whispered once to the water, "I am still here, just to make sure." That night, the stars returned. You lay beneath them, arms folded, body curled around your last scrap of warmth, and for the first time you dreamed, not of Sparta, not of battle, but of your mother's hands and of your own face, young, unbroken, vanishing into mist. On the 5th day, you found the gate. It was not a gate in the usual sense, just 2 massive stones, upright, placed by hands long dead. A final nail had been driven into the left one, a message. You placed your nail beside it, tapped it once, 3 times, then turned your back and walked away. The return was not marked. No nails, no signs, only instinct and silence. You were no longer following a road. You were carrying it inside you. When you reached the edge of the training grounds, no one greeted you. No trumpet, no elder, just a folded cloak placed on the nearest stone. You took it, draped it over your shoulders, and stepped into the morning light. Changed. They say the iron road does not teach, it erases, until only the most unbreakable pieces of you remain, and those pieces do not speak. You, friend, would not survive that road, because you would try to hold on to something, your past, your softness, your voice. But the road takes it all, and if you resist, it does not bend, it devours. Death was not hidden in Sparta. It walked with you through the yard. It watched you during drills. It sat beside you at evening meal, silent, patient, waiting. But once each year, Sparta stopped pretending it did not see him, and it gave him a seat at the fire. They called it Festival of Bone and Dust, not a feast, not a mourning, but a reckoning. It came not on a fixed date, but when the wind changed, when the ashes from the mountains blew south, settling like fine snow upon the rooftops of the city, the elders would say, "The fallen are coming home," and the fires would be lit. No bells were rung, no flags raised, but every Spartan knew. Boys stopped sparring. Women set out black garlands on the thresholds. Shields were placed upside down beside doors. Even the dogs did not bark. The city became quiet, expectant, like breath held in the chest before a scream. You had witnessed the festival once as a younger boy, standing in the shadows, behind the line of the older Agog youths. But now you would stand in the circle, as one of them, as someone who had touched the road and not turned away. The preparation began at dusk. The ashes were gathered from the braziers, mixed with oil and a pinch of crushed bone powder. You did not ask whose bones. No one ever asked. It could have been a hero. It could have been a traitor. Sparta did not divide the dead, only the living. The mixture was smeared across your face, in 3 lines, one across the brow, one down the nose, and one across the mouth. "Speak no lies," the priest whispered. "See no fear. Remember no comfort." Then he moved on. You stood still, not cold, not warm, just aware. as though every inch of your skin remembered something it had never felt. You marched at nightfall, single file, no weapons, only cloaks and bare feet. The procession wound through the city in silence, each step leaving behind a faint mark of ash and earth. The people watched from windows, from rooftops, from behind half-opened doors. No applause, no weeping, only eyes and the wind. At the heart of Sparta stood the cairn of the nameless, a mound of stones, each bearing the mark of someone who had died without legacy, not without honor, just without memory. No sons, no brothers left behind, no grave, only the cairn and the dust. You knelt beside the cairn. Each boy removed a small object from his cloak, something once belonging to a fallen warrior. A tooth, a scrap of cloth, a carved token. You placed yours without a word. A ring, rusted and misshapen, once found beneath the barracks. You never learned who it belonged to. That didn't matter. It belonged to Sparta now. Then came the fire. The elders lit the pyres, 7 great flames, one for each of the first fallen houses of Sparta. Each blaze roared upward, casting flickering shadows across the stone. You were told to watch until the last flame died. No blinking, no looking away, no sleep. You watched for hours, until the world became only ember and smoke, until your eyes stung and your mind emptied, until the silence became so deep you could hear your own blood moving. Then, and only then, a woman stepped forward, tall, grey-haired, draped in mourning cloth, the last widow. She carried a bundle of bones in her arms, no larger than a child. She laid them gently on the altar stone. Then she sang, a song with no words, only breath, rising and falling like tide on sand. A lullaby for those who had no one left to sing them home. You felt something shift inside you, not sadness, not fear, something smaller, quieter, like the echo of a name you had forgotten you once knew. At dawn, you were allowed to rise. The ash on your face was now part of your skin. The fire had burned low, revealing blackened bones in its belly, and one by one, the boys placed their hands into the embers, to carry the heat with them, to let it mark them. You did not flinch, you let it burn. The festival ended without farewell. You walked back in silence. No songs, no oaths, but something followed you, not a ghost, not a curse, just the understanding. You too would one day join the cairn, and if you were lucky, someone might leave a ring for you. You would not survive. This, friend, not because of pain, but because of the weight, the unbearable simplicity of being forgotten well, of living a life meant not to be praised, but to be placed quietly into the stone pile, as one more thread in Sparta's great, grey cloak. They never told you when the last morning would come. There would be no trumpet, no scroll nailed to the wall, no elder whispering into your ear. The only sign would be the silence, not the silence of sleep or of rest, but a deeper kind, the kind that breathes in circles, the kind that waits. You woke before the stars had finished fading, not to a shout, not to a hand on your shoulder. You simply opened your eyes and knew. This was the morning of the final circle, the last ritual of the Agog, the one that came not with celebration, but with stillness. You rose, so did Lycon, so did Menon. Neither spoke. You wrapped your cloak slowly. The others stirred, but did not rise. Only a few had been chosen, or rather, only a few had not been discarded. The final circle was not for all. Only those who had endured every blade, every silence, every vanishing of self. Outside, the sky was the color of wet stone. No stars, no moon, just the slow awakening of the world. The training yard was empty. At its center lay a wide circle, etched into the earth with precision, not with chalk, but with ash, the kind that clung to fingers, the kind used to mark the dead. You approached. Each step felt heavier than the last, as if the earth was not ready to let you go. You stepped to the edge. There were 6 of you. No weapons, no shields, only bare feet on dirt that knew the shape of your footsteps far too well. The elders stood in a ring outside the circle, old, hunched, cloaked in black. They said nothing, but they watched, and somehow, that was worse. Their silence held a weight no shout could carry. Then came the staff, passed from elder to elder until it reached the center. It was laid on the ground at the center of the circle, a single olive branch, burned at both ends, tied to the shaft with red twine. It was not a trophy, it was a question. One by one, each of you would step into the circle, face another, and wait. No one told you what to do. That was the test. There was no command, no instruction, no fight unless one chose it. But if you stepped into the circle and could not stand still, you failed. If you stepped into the circle and chose violence without cause, you failed. The only way to pass was to endure. Even when you didn't understand, the first 2 boys stepped forward. They were young, barely past their 16th spring. They circled one another, eyes narrowed. Then, the taller one lunged. He was met not with resistance, but calm. The other boy took the blow, fell, and did not rise. He had chosen not to fight, and in that moment, the test was passed. He did not win, but he endured. When it was your turn, you stepped across the ash line with care. The dirt felt colder here, the air thinner. Across from you stood Lycon. You had known him since the first whipping, since the first night you cried and were told never to do so again. His eyes were tired, but steady. You both bowed your heads and waited. 1 minute, then 2, then 5. The wind stirred, the dust shifted, but neither of you moved. There was no fear, no pride, only breath, shared in silence, and when the staff was lifted from the ground, you stepped back, together, without having struck a single blow. That was the lesson. That was the moment. To stand ready to kill, and choose, instead, to remain. Not for mercy, but for duty, for mastery over the self. When the circle closed, the elder stepped forward. He carried a bowl filled with cold river water and dipped a length of wool into it. One by one, he washed your hands, not to clean you, but to separate you from what had come before. He whispered only 4 words into your ear. You are no longer learning, then moved on. There was no feast, no garlands, only silence. You returned to the barracks, not boys, not students, but something harder to name. You had no certificate, no ring, but everyone who saw you knew. You had stood in the final circle, and you had not broken. You, friend, would not survive this morning. Not because you are weak, but because you still believe manhood is earned in battle. Sparta knows better. True power is learned in stillness, in choosing not to strike, in trusting that your silence can shape more than your sword ever could. They do not cheer when you return. There are no drums, no garlands, no arms lifted high in victory. In Sparta, the end of the agoge does not bring glory. It brings silence, a deeper kind of silence than before. Because now you are no longer becoming, you have become, and what you have become is not meant to speak. The sun is low when you cross the threshold of the barracks again. Your sandals are torn, your feet hardened. The cloak around your shoulders feels like ash, not because it is tattered, but because you are no longer wearing it to stay warm. You wear it now because it belongs to a Spartan, and now, so do you. There is no one to greet you. The others who finish the final circle walk beside you in silence, but not together. You are not a cohort anymore. You are not boys among boys. You are no longer even friends in the old sense. You are parts of the city now, limbs of Sparta herself. Interchangeable, enduring, quiet. You walk to your cot, the same, one where you first learned how little sleep could comfort. It has not changed, but you have. When you sit, the wood creaks differently. It bends not under weight, but under memory. Years of it. Scraped skin, clenched teeth, winter air in your lungs. Like fire, you find something resting there. A small flat stone, dark, smooth, etched with a single name. Not the name you were born with. Not the name whispered over your cradle by a mother who no longer speaks of you. The name Sparta gave you. Sinon, carved not in elegance, but permanence. Beside it, one white line. It is not explained, but you understand. It means you returned. It means you stood your ground. It means most of all that you said nothing when others might have begged to be heard. The boys who have not yet reached their final trial avoid your eyes, not out of fear, out of reverence. They know what you have become. Not a hero, not a champion. Something simpler, more dangerous. A man who no longer needs the world to know he exists, only that he endures. For the next few days, your routine does not change. There is no celebration. You eat the same food. You run the same drills. But now, no one corrects you. No one shouts your name. No one tests your resolve. Because they know. You have passed beyond instruction. You are now Spartas to command. One morning, as the fog still clings to the fields, you are called to the river. An elder waits there. He does not speak. He offers a cloth and a blade. You wash, not to cleanse, to mark the end of the boyhood you buried in dust. You cut a lock of your hair, drop it into the current. It floats for a moment, then vanishes, like all things meant to be forgotten. Later, a woman stops you in the street. She is old, her hands cracked from sun and stone. She looks at you for a long moment, then nods. Just once. She does not ask your name. She does not ask what you endured. She only says, "Good," and walks on. That is all. No more is needed. You see Lycon sometimes. He does not speak to you. You do not need him to. You share glances now and then, during dust drills or over a bowl of barley. In those glances, there are years. There is fire. There is loss. There is the understanding that if either of you falls in battle, the other will not grieve. He will remember and move forward. On your final night in the barracks, before you are assigned to a unit, you lie awake. The others breathe in, sleep, but you do not dream, you simply exist. And for the first time, that is enough. You feel the weight of the name carved into your stone. You remember the circles, the ash, the silence, and you know you do not need to be known. You only need to stand. This is why you would not survive. Not because you cannot fight, not because you cannot bleed, but because you still think that becoming a warrior means being seen. In Sparta, the only ones who are seen are the ones who fall. The rest are remembered only in formation, in silence, in the breath between footsteps. You would not survive because you would want to tell the story. Sparta never tells the story. Sparta is the story, and those who walk her path do so without a voice.